is hardly innocent. She's down in the dirt with me, whether she likes it or not.
No one inside the royal orbit pretends Meghan Markle is a passive bystander anymore. Even her most ardent defenders admit she attracts controversy the way Westminster attracts late-night whispers. Not always by choice, but certainly not by accident. And before anyone sharpens their pitchforks, let's be clear, what follows is the sort of murmur you hear in the corners of private members' clubs, not the official line. Highly inconvenient rumours, long circulating and rarely spoken aloud. Still, they exist. And the louder Prince Andrew becomes in his post-exile bitterness, the more of these old stories start creeping back into the daylight. He knows very well that his own downfall wasn't gentle or private or even remotely contained. The Epstein saga dragged him through the global headlines like a cautionary tale. Titles stripped, duties frozen, reputation evaporated. Everyone saw it. The press, the palace, the public. Silence wasn't an option. And yet within that same unflattering spotlight, one question has floated around in hushed tones for years. Why did certain names receive scrutiny, while others appeared entirely insulated? Why were some associations dissected down to the bone, while others were quietly ushered out of the frame? Because, and here's where the muttering begins, some insiders swear there were chapters of Meghan's pre-royal life that brushed up against the same social circles Andrew once moved in. Not proven, not documented, but whispered enough to make you wonder why the story never surfaced properly. Same time frame, overlapping social spheres, elite parties that drew the same crowd, yet only one person was burned alive in the public square. Which, depending on who you ask, isn't coincidence, it's choreography. The most persistent rumor claims that Meghan and Andrew weren't the strangers the public assumed. Not close, the palace always insisted, barely acquainted. But those who claim to have been near the situation tell a more entangled tale. Private conversations, social overlap, and a connection quietly brushed aside once Meghan entered Harry's world. Conveniently forgotten, strategically forgotten, some say. Was it true? No one will say it on record. But the fact the question exists at all is the point. And then there's the yacht story, the one that resurfaces online every few months like a stubborn tide. A photograph here, a timeline there, stitched together by people who follow these things far too closely. Meghan, pre-fame, spotted on a private yacht during the same era in which Epstein's final girlfriend, Karina Shuliak, described similar scenes. Not evidence of wrongdoing, not even close, but enough to give conspiracy chasers a lifetime supply of material, enough for royal watchers to raise an eyebrow and mutter, "Odd, isn't it?" That lingering odd is what fuels the rumors. Meghan was not yet a household name. She wasn't on the A-list. She wasn't circulating among aristocrats. So how did she suddenly appear in those elite, extremely well-curated spaces? That's the part her critics obsess over, the access. Some trace that access back to Toronto and to Marcus Anderson, the quietly influential Soho House gatekeeper who seems to collect future power players like souvenirs. He introduced her to the right people, opened doors few knew existed, and within a short period she had ascended into rooms that most aspiring actresses only dream of. Again, nothing unusual for someone ambitious, but in hindsight, the speed of it all is what gets people whispering. Especially when you connect it to the rumor that Meghan once had her sights set elsewhere in the royal family. Not Harry, but Andrew. It's a claim repeated often enough in royal gossip circles to have become its own folklore. The story goes that she had allegedly tried to move within Andrew's orbit, and that Sarah Ferguson, loyal to him through every chapter, had allegedly made sure that never went anywhere meaningful. There is no proof. There is no confirmation. There is only the stubbornness of the rumor itself, which refuses to die. But here's where things tend to shift tone when insiders talk. Some believe that by the time Meghan and Harry met, she already had a working grasp of royal dynamics. She wasn't stepping into the unknown. She was navigating a world she had already brushed up against. And if that's true, even slightly true, it's no wonder some people inside the palace became uneasy later. Because as the Andrew scandal spiraled, the rumor mill claimed that Virginia Roberts, the woman whose allegations detonated Andrew's public life, had allegedly suggested Meghan might be relevant as a witness, not because of any accusations, but because she was thought to have been in Andrew's wider social orbit long ago. It never happened. It never was pursued. But the fact her name ever appeared in those whispers was enough to make the palace twitchy. Then the whispers disappeared altogether, vanished, wiped from public memory. That's always the interesting part, because when an institution goes completely still on a topic, it rarely means there's nothing there. It usually means the subject is politically inconvenient, and for a monarchy already battered from all sides, reopening questions about who knew whom, where and when would be the last thing anyone wanted. Especially not when Meghan was now married to Harry, a prince already volatile, already bruised by his battles with the press, already half out the door. According to some royal watchers, palace officials feared that dragging Meghan's past, or rumours of her past, into the public square might push Harry into a full psychological freefall. And after witnessing the Andrew implosion, they weren't eager to run that experiment again. So the shutters came down, strictly, absolutely, permanently. But secrecy breeds resentment, and no one feels that quite like Prince Andrew, who, according to those who know the temperature of his circle, has become increasingly bitter. He lost everything. She lost nothing. His past connections were treated as scandalous, hers as irrelevant. His reputation was placed under a microscope, hers under a velvet cloth. For a man with no public future left to protect, that imbalance reportedly stings more than anything. And this is where things turn dangerous, not for the monarchy, but for Meghan. Because Andrew has very little left to lose, and when a sidelined royal begins to feel unfairly sacrificed, he tends to look for company in the wilderness. Sarah Ferguson, loyal to him through every chapter, is said to share many of the same memories. Eugenie, too, is often folded into speculation, though quietly. The rumor, and again, it is only rumor, is that between them, more is known about Meghan's early connections than has ever been allowed into the public sphere. Whether there's truth in that or not is impossible to verify, but the timing of Andrew's renewed frustration is striking. For the first time, the threat to Meghan doesn't come from the tabloids, or the politicians, or the public. It comes from within the royal walls, from someone who feels discarded, humiliated, and silenced. And here's where the commentators keep awake. Every palace crisis eventually comes down to one buried truth that becomes too heavy to keep smothered. It may not be scandalous, it may not be dramatic, it may simply be politically inconvenient. But whatever that long-standing rumor is, the one said to tie Meghan's old social world to Andrew's, if it ever surfaces, it won't just reshape her public image, it will reshuffle the royal narrative, redraw alliances, and force Buckingham Palace to answer questions it has avoided for years. That, according to insiders, is why Meghan appears increasingly agitated, why Harry looks worn down, why Catherine has stepped into a calmer, firmer role, and why King Charles, ever pragmatic, is reportedly preparing the institution for turbulence rather than tranquility. Because the monarchy can survive scandal, it can survive scrutiny. What it struggles with is uncertainty, especially when that uncertainty sits inside the family itself. And if Andrew decides the time has come to unburden himself, well, Westminster has seen many shocking moments, but a sidelined prince turning the tables on a duchess would be a plot twist even seasoned political players wouldn't dare to predict. Whatever happens next, this much is clear. The story isn't finished. It's barely begun.